This motion is a kind of levelling up motion with the net zero motion that we passed a few years ago. And a lot of investment of time and energy and effort has gone into that. So biodiversity has been a little bit of the secondary cousin, in a sense. So this is to really raise it up, the church's agenda, because we are landowners. We have been gifted land to be wise stewards of. And our land holdings tend to, as you will well know, be in three different areas. There's the land around parishes, generally churchyards, and how we can manage our churchyards for good. To be good for mourners, good for green spaces and people who need rest and reflection and a green lung in the city, and good for nature. And I think we can do all the three of those things in tandem together. And the Daily Telegraph came out yesterday fully supportive of this on a big article. Hurrah! Because I had sort of visions when I was being quizzed at the press conference of the sort of headline about how terrible all this is. So it's really good, because actually this is already going on in a lot of places, and probably many of you here are already engaged with that sort of thing. Working out which parts of the churchyard should be mown, which can be allowed to grow up, bird boxes, when to trim hedges, how to look after particularly veteran trees. Some of our oldest trees in this nation are in churchyards. And there's great folklore attached to many of those trees, and the species of trees that have been planted, like Betula trembula. The aspen carries in its name trembula because it was thought to be the tree on which Jesus died, and is still trembling with any breath of air. And that's part of our sort of country law. So there's much around our churchyards that's already happening in the poorest of communities I've served in, and in the wealthiest, in the inner city and in the deeply rural, about how do we manage our churchyards, both for people and for nature. And my catchphrase I've been using is places of the living, not just the dead. Then there's glebe-land, and how we look after that's there. It provides income for dioceses to fund mission and ministry. Often it's very small parcels of land, which is quite a challenge for glebe agents to manage. But it is often agricultural land or green lung space in communities, or it may be being reserved at some future date for housing, because of course there is, as the Archbishop's Commission on Housing has shown, a real need also in this nation for sensitive housing, and how that can potentially be done in a positive way for nature as well. And then there's the national holdings of the Church Commissioners. And I declare an interest as a Church Commissioner. I've been, because of my background in ecology and forestry, I've been asking questions for 10 years or more about the Church Commissioners' forest holdings. And the change that I've seen within the Commissioners in 10 years around the E in ESG has been incredible. And we have an absolutely fantastic team in the rural team, but working in partnership with tenant farmers. And I hope this afternoon in the debate, there's no kicking of farmers. Farmers grow our food for us. The vast majority of them want the very best land, because when land is good for nature, it's good for people, it's good for crops, it's good for business. And so I hope we can praise our farmers, because many of our tenants, both of glebe land and of Church Commissioners' land, have been tenants for over 100 years. These tenancies have passed down through families. And so what you can do with a tenant in terms of requiring them to do things is protected in law. So in terms of these historic tenants, we can't just say this is what's going to happen on this land. It's about encouragement, it's about sharing good practice. I was at the Norfolk farming conference a couple of weeks ago, 400 farmers. The theme of the day was all about regenerative farming. They're really at the top of the curve on many of these things, and I see the church commissioners' encouragement and engagement with tenants and with new tenants and the selection of new tenants for farms being very aligned with, say, the Duchy of Cornwall or the Crown Estate in wanting to do things very positively for nature. So those are the three areas of our land holdings, and the motion that you have seen, which I hope you'll support this afternoon and speak in favour of, is designed to enhance biodiversity up our agenda so that we can delight in the wonder of God's creation all around us, enable other people to delight in that creation, which I see as a great evangelistic opportunity. There's many a person who started by cutting the grass in the churchyard or being part of a churchyard working group, who's then come later to be confirmed or kneeling at the altar. And so there's a way in for evangelism as well. So thank you for being here. We've got a stellar team of people to reflect with us. And do you want me to hand now to Ruth?
Right, thanks, right. I think, shall I stay sitting here for this? Yeah, wait. We're going to do it a bit differently, and I'm going to stay sitting down for my bit. Thank you, Graham. Thanks ever so much. It's been great over the years that I've been involved in these issues to see your support and to see your voice coming through so strongly, and thank you for all that you're doing in your role. And great to have all of you here. Thank you for turning up, particularly on a sunny day when you might be forgiven for wanting actually to be outside in sort of as much of nature as you can find around here. For me, you can always find some somewhere, can't you? So my name is Ruth Valerio, and I'm one of the directors of Tier Fund. I'm sure many of you will know Tier Fund, International Development and Advocacy Organisation. And I head up our advocacy work and our theology work and some of the other aspects of that as well. And have been writing and speaking and advocating and trying my best to live out issues of environmental care and land and nature for many, many years, and it's a real delight to partner with the Church of England, sit on the Environment Working Group and be involved in different ways. I have been involved with Arosha UK for a long time as well, with the Eco-Church scheme. Where's it gone? It was over there, it's now over there. And I imagine most of you are from churches that are involved with Eco-Church in one way or another. If you're not, then that's the first thing for you to do, is to get your church registered and be involved. But I've no doubt that you know all about that already. So I've been asked to look at why theologically, faithfully, we might bring a motion around land and nature to General Synod. Isn't this a secular thing? You know, it's about land management, how we look after things, how we take care of the land. It's something that all good landowners should be doing, whether it's the Duchy estate or the Crown estate, or I don't know, Oxford and Cambridge colleges who own land all over the place. Isn't that just something that we should all be involved in if we're in a privileged position to own land? Why is this something specifically for the church? And I want to reflect on what we bring to this whole national debate from a church, from a Christian perspective. Those of you here who've heard me speak before know that I always come back to the affirmations that we see in Genesis 1. that God looked at all that he had made and said, it's very good, it's fantastic. God absolutely loves this creation. And at the end of the story of creation, we have that affirmation that everything is very good. But you will know before that, we have the individual days, so to speak. And at the end of each day, God looks and says, it is good. So it becomes very good in its completion. But actually before that point, each different aspect of the natural world that is created is good. And it's good in and of itself. It's not only good because of what benefit it might bring to other creatures or to ourselves. Each part of creation has value for its own sake. The land and the trees, the waters, as well as the creatures are described as being good. I think this description of God looking and declaring it good it's such a positive evaluation, and I can't help but see emotion in that. You know, if you've created something and you look at it and you say, yeah, that's good. How does that make you feel? It's not just a rational statement, is it? It comes with emotion. Yeah, I really like that. As God looks at each aspect through the created world, I like to think that they bring God joy and bring God pleasure. The beautiful narcissi sitting on the tables there that you can probably smell. I was sitting on one of the tables going through my notes, eating my lunch, and I could smell them. They're so beautiful. That wasn't just a rational scientific thing happening in my nose that I can explain. It made me happy to have that smell. And I like to think that the land and the trees and the waters and all the creatures make God happy. And this affirmation of the goodness of the land and the plants and the trees is a reminder to us that our faith isn't a disembodied one. We don't exist as floating beings somewhere in the ether, but we are rooted. We are rooted in place and in land and in the wider world that God has created. And the wider creation isn't simply the background for us, it's the context, it's the place within which we live out our faith. And it's an integral part of how we work out our salvation. We see that creation story and the verses, the days that talk about the creation of the land and the trees and the seed-bearing fruit. And if you go into the Hebrew, there's quite a lot of sort of repetition of the words in a really beautiful way. And they remind us that the people of God in the scriptures lived their lives deeply independent on agriculture. Maybe on their own or on the farmers that Graham was referring to, even if they lived in an urban context. And it's a reminder too for us that however urban we may have become globally, we all depend on agriculture for our existence, even if that is forgotten and may feel distant to us as we open up our plastic wrappings and eat what's inside. And so the land plays a crucial part in the story of God's people in the Hebrew scriptures. And how the people live in the land is a key part of how they walk with God and how they follow God's ways. They're always to remember that the land belongs ultimately to God. Psalm 24 verse 1, such a well-known verse. For us the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And so the particular land that the Hebrews have been given is exactly that. It's a gift. And it's a promise that goes back to the covenant that God makes with Abraham in Genesis 12. And it's a gift which they must not take for granted or abuse. And of course, those words become particularly salient in our current context don't they? And we're very aware of the fragile nature of land and of who lives in it, and of treating those who live in it right, and as well as treating the land right. And the people are to see themselves as tenants of the land which God has given. Moses tells the people, "You may say to yourself, 'My power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me.' But remember," Moses says, "that's not actually the case. The Lord your God, remember the Lord your God, for it's he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, for he has given you the land, and so he confirms his covenant as he swore to your ancestors." Many of us are probably used to reading the Hebrew scriptures as the story of God working to restore the people's relationship with him through the laws he gives and the establishment of the priesthood and the sacrificial system. And of course that's right, but that can't ever be divorced from how the people relate to God's whole creation, both the human creation and the wider creation. And the quality of the people's relationship with God, what we call their righteousness, is seen precisely in how they treat other people, whether they take care of people or are living with injustice and oppression. And it's also seen, their righteousness is also seen in how they take care of the land. Whether, for example, they allow the land and their animals to have Sabbath rest, or whether they flog them mercilessly to produce more and more. And I'm always interested in the scriptures that the land doesn't stay inert or silent in the background. And the scriptures portray the land as having an agency of her own. Psalm 148, of course, shows all manner of God's creation exuberantly praising God. And that includes not only living creatures, but also other aspects, or also aspects of the land as well. The waters above the skies, the mountains and hills, the fruit trees and the cedars, they're all part of this wonderful community of creation that has agency and is praising God. Isaiah, of course, describes the mountains and hills as bursting into song before their God, on account of the people returning to God, and the trees of the field clapping their hands. I wonder what that looks like to you. Yes, it's beautiful poetic imagery, isn't it? But I think maybe it's more than that as well. I think there's somehow the trees have their own way of clapping their hands. And of course, when there's deforestation, we're preventing them from doing that. And the mountains and the hills have their own ways of bursting into song. Looking into the New Testament, Paul describes the creation as groaning in pain, like labour pains. Again, creation has its own agency. And creation waits eagerly for the children of God to be revealed. The New Testament scholar J.B. Phillips translates this as all creation standing on tiptoe. And I love that image. You know what it's like? You're sort of standing on tiptoe, eagerly, expectantly, looking ahead. And that wonderful idea of all creation standing on tiptoe and waiting for the children of God to be revealed. Paul's depiction of the creation groaning picks up on the sad reality that alongside praise, the land also responds negatively, as the land witnesses the sins of the people in not practicing justice or taking care of the needy, and therefore seeing the resulting judgment that comes about, that God brings on his people. Both Isaiah and Jeremiah describe the land as mourning. And it's interesting, if you look at those verses, Isaiah 24 and Jeremiah 4, if you look at those in the NIV translates that as being that the land dries up. Shame on you, NIV, for taking away the agency of the land. It's not that the land dries up, the land mourns. It's a very visceral response that the land gives. And Joel also speaks of the ground mourning, which again the NIV translates as dry up. And so the land, in all of its dusty, soily, muddy, earthy physicality with its beautiful smells, is an indispensable part of the story of salvation. And it's no surprise, therefore, that the future also has that physicality to it. The Old Testament prophets look forward to a time when the people will live in their own houses and eat the fruit of their vineyards. And the New Testament looks forward to a picture of a garden city that's very urban, but also has a river and trees that are there in it. That concept of the garden city may give us hope, those of us sitting here who are from an urban background and wondering what the point is of all this talk about soil and land, when primarily our experience is concrete and glass. And the Bible reflects different contexts, and the people of God often live more in the city than they do in the countryside. Cities can be very good, and they can allow us to reflect the creativity that we see in God. Excuse me. But even in the midst of urbanism, we need the light and the water, the land and the seed-bearing vegetation that God has created in order to survive. And it's to our peril when we forget that. And to a large part, we have forgotten it, haven't we? We've lost that connection between ourselves and the land. I'm reading a wonderful book at the moment, actually for the second time, called Braiding Sweetgrass. I imagine some of you here may have read it. If you haven't, then put that at the top of, I'm sure you have a very large pile of books, and put this one at the top of it. It's written by a woman who is a plant biologist, and she's also a Native American, and she weaves into her writing, weaving in of her plant science with the Native American mythologies and a discussion of our current context. Absolutely beautiful. It's one of the most stunning books I've read. And I read it a little while ago and thought, this looks so good, and I loved it. I wanted to read it again and read it with a bunch of people. So I'm leading an online book group for Lent, not a very traditional Lent book, but anyway. And there's a whole bunch of us who are meeting every Friday evening for just 45 minutes during Lent. And we're reading Braiding Sweetgrass together. And most of us meeting are Christians, and so we're reflecting on our faith as well as we do so. And she reflects so much about our lost connection with the natural world, coming from her Native American background. And one of the things she talks about is, is changing our grammar and our language to pay more attention and give more respect to the inanimate. So we have our English doesn't allow us to speak. We can only talk about it and things. And she challenges us instead to talk about tree persons, or trees as the standing people, or the others as the rock people. And we took as our homework from our Lent group last week to be proactive in speaking in ways that sound odd to us. And as we're out and about, greetings, Sister Narcissi, thank you for giving me your beauty and your colour and your scent. And we've been doing that during the week, and just seeing how to reframe this differently. I don't think in any way that cuts across our Christian faith still holds absolutely firmly to the belief that God is the creator, not treating the natural world as divine, but finding ways to have that respect and pay attention. Through my work with Tear Fund, I met a woman called Jochebed, who's from the Gunaduli people and was brought up on the Gunayala Islands off the coast of Panama. And she was telling me about the Guna practice of burying the umbilical cord and placenta in the ground when a baby is born. The women cut the cord and wrap the cord with the placenta and give it to the grandfather, who takes it to the mountain and buries it under a cacao tree. And there's a song that they sing. And she was saying that planting the umbilical cord and the placenta is a powerful way of showing our connection to the land and our dependence on it. As Jochebed said to me, for 9 months the umbilical cord and placenta united the baby and the mother. Now the cord ties men and women to the earth. It fertilizes the earth from which a plant germinates as a sign of unity and of the hope for future generations. I'm not sure that we're going to be doing that anytime soon, but I wonder what practices could we develop that would unite us and symbolize our unity with the earth, and that might challenge us in how we treat the earth. So why is this motion coming today? Because as astrophysicist and theologian David Wilkinson says, matter matters to God. And therefore it matters to God how we treat the land. With the C of E lands and all the nature that's on them, we have the potential to do huge good. And as Graham was saying, to be a witness to our human neighbours too, to those who are tenant farmers or people who enjoy our land and share it in some way. And so I pray that this motion this afternoon will take us many steps forward in leading the Church of England to be a church that fully lives out its worship of the Lord of all creation.